Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and cover some territory today for our appendicular skeleton, especially in the pelvic girdle and the femur. So if you have your skeletal terms to know list, this would be a good time to get that out because we're going to get quite a few of these terms figured out. So we left off last time with, I think we went all the way down to finger bones, and now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the lower limbs. So here's your pelvic girdle. It consists of two coxae or os coxae bones. This is one os coxae, and this is the other coxal bone here. Now, it's kind of weird we call them, coxae or coxal bones because we can just call it a hip right now. This hip is actually three different bones. And so we'll have to name those. The ilium is one bone, the ischium is one bone, and the pubis is one bone. And so there are some things we have to kind of differentiate out, but we call them coxae to start with. And so the sacrum you're already familiar with. Here, this bone's called the ilium. This is your sacrum. And so where these two articulate, this is kind of a nice name, is the sacroiliac joint. Very logical. Sacroiliac joint, the articulation between the sacrum and the iliac bone. So that's kind of cool. The other thing you're going to need to know from this view, this is the anterior view, okay, the front of the hips. This is the rear view. So this here is this little hard cartilage pad, and you'll see it written a couple different ways. Symphysis pubis. I've also seen pubic symphysis. So, pick your favorite. I'll accept both on a test. But symphysis pubis is this hard cartilage pad that connects the two pubic bones together. And so you have a pubic arch right here, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and that angle can tell you a little bit about the person or the skeleton, and that's where we're going to start. So this is what makes up the pelvis: the sacrum, the coccyx, and our two coxae. So support, of course. Why do you have hip bones? No duh. Supports your trunk, of course. Attaches your legs, absolutely. It's protective bony casing for the bladder, which sits right in here. Internal reproductive organs, and a little bit of the distal intestines, a little bit of large intestine, and those kind of things that it's going to protect. So I think we'll get a little better view of the acetabulum later, so we'll save that. All right, so here's your color-coded, I guess, coxal bones. This is the external surface, okay? So this would be the outside of your hip. This is the internal surface. And so your coxae develops from three parts when it's forming. The ilium, this is the largest, okay? This right here is the socket that your femur is going to fit into, okay? This is the acetabulum. So the upper part of your hip is called the ilium, all right? This structure right here is the iliac crest. There's not a lot on the ilium you can actually feel, but you can feel the iliac crest if you put your hands on your hips up, high, where people don't wear pants anymore at this high. But the iliac crest is this bony structure you can feel on your hips that make this kind of arch. There's also this structure right here, the anterior superior iliac spine. And so we call this ASIS. And so this would be, let's see, this is the outside, and that is the ischium. And so it would be right here. Forward and at the top is the anterior superior iliac spine, okay? Or right here, anterior superior iliac spine. So that's one that is on your terms to know list, and I can show you on our on our skeleton here in class. You just let me know and I'll quiz you over that anytime. So then we go to the ischium. This is this yellow colored portion right here. Basically where you sit, what you sit on. That gives you an idea of where the ischium is. It's the lowest portion. I think the only piece you need to know is the ischial tuberosity, which is this whole structure right here. This little line is pointing to it. This whole structure is the ischial tuberosity. And we're going to connect a lot of muscles into the ischial tuberosity because it's this big rough surface that'll work for hooking muscles too. And so those are some things you'll want to know for your ischium. And then the pubis is this teeny tiny little bone right here, and there's really nothing you need to know except for that it's called the pubis. And so the pubis is the anterior most portion, so the front of the hips. They join at, like we've already talked about, symphysis pubis, this cartilage. The pubic arch right here is this angle between the two pubic bones. So here to here. Whatever this angle is going to be able to tell you whether it's male or female. If it's about 90 degrees or bigger, it's probably a female. If it's narrower than 90 degrees, it's probably a male. And so that's the pubic arch. It's kind of cool. So let's see. We already talked about the sacroiliac joint. That's this stuff up here in pink. The obturator foramen are these holes right here and right here. They are the largest foramen, actually, I suppose foramina in our body, and they are formed by the ischium and the pubis. And we need that big hole to run some really big arteries and veins through, like the femoral artery, stuff like that. Some nerves need to make it through there. So it's a pretty big hole in that bony structure. And then right here, this hip socket is called the acetabulum, and it is formed by all three bones. And the acetabulum means vinegar cup. I don't know if that's going to help you remember that or not, guys, but acetabulum is the socket that the head of your femur fits into, okay? And so that one is certainly going to be on your terms to know list there. The pelvic brim, I do not think is on your terms to know list, but it's this line right here is all that is. It's, I don't know, there it is. That's what it is. So here you have it. You know what, this is actually a pretty good view right here. This guy, let's see if we can't get a line on him. I like this view better than the view that it actually came up at. This guy and this guy, okay? Anterior superior iliac spine. That's one you gotta know. All right, so that I like that view for those. Anyways, differences between the male and the female pelvis. This here is the female pelvis. This here is the male pelvis. In a female, you will see iliac bones that are flared out further to the sides than in your males, which are a little more tall and narrow. Generally, the whole hip bones are broader in a female than they are in a male. And the one that I had already mentioned to you, that pubic arch, is going to be sitting about that 90-degree mark or better, whereas for guys, that pubic arch becomes rather narrow. You'll also see a little more distance in the female pelvis between the ischial spines and the ischial tuberosities, and the sacral curvatures are a little bit shorter and flatter. And females tend to have just a little bit lighter bones than the males. And so there you have the difference you can see in that pelvic brim between the male and the female are also a little bit different. There's a little wider space there in the female pelvis than there is in the male pelvis. And so there you have difference between males and females hips, and of course there are several reasons for that, but certainly when you look at the angles in pubic arches and the brims, certainly childbirth might be one reason why these hips are designed the way they are. So I think we have time to do the femur before we call it good. So let's jump into the femur. Again, we're going to get some terms to know done. Anterior view, posterior view. So this should be a right femur. Yeah, a right femur. Okay. Oh, says so right there. Goodness gracious, I did all that thinking for nothing. All right. A, this is the head. It's not that terribly exciting. It articulates with the acetabulum, which you guys already know. This little tiny dot is called the fovea capitis, and it is a pit. And in that pit is going to attach what's called a round ligament. And that round ligament is going to hold the head of that femur into the acetabulum. So the other end of the round ligament hooks into the acetabulum of the hip. C, you probably could have guessed this at this point. This little line right here is the anatomical neck. D is the greater trochanter. So we had tubercles on our humerus, and they are trochanters on our femurs. But the terms aren't that different. They're still greater and lesser. So if it's the humerus in your arm, it's the greater and lesser tubercle. If it's the big bony ridges on the femur, it is the greater and the lesser trochanter. F, I don't think is on your terms to know list. It's the intertrochanteric crest. I'm pretty sure that's not on there. The intertrochanteric line is also not on there. Surgical neck here. It's kind of a little bit different than your humerus. So we have our surgical neck and our anatomical neck. And so it's not too different from the humerus, but they're a little further apart, and you still have to go below the big bony ridges. So, I mean, it's similar enough. You should be able to figure that out without too much trouble. Eye is only on the posterior view. You get this bony ridge, and it's a nice straight line, runs straight down the femur. That is called linea aspera, and I'm pretty sure that's on your terms to know list. And then we get to some pretty familiar stuff. The big ridge or bump outside of the condyle is still called the medial epicondyle, just like in, where else did we see that? I think we saw it on a tibia, and I think we saw it on a humerus as well, I think. And then K is our lateral epicondyle. And so you've seen that term before as well. All right, let's keep going. Lateral condyle, got it. Medial condyle, got it. Okay, intercondylar fossa is N, which is, the depression between the condyles. O is the patellar surface, so the surface that your kneecap or your patella sits on. Okay, and then M is the medial condyle, and L is the lateral condyle. So the smooth ridges where they articulate with the tibia is going to be the condyles, and the bony ridges on the outside are going to be the epicondyles. Then you're in good shape. So the femur covers a lot of terms to know taken care of on that femur. And so here's a little look at how these joints articulate. Here's the acetabulum in your hips. Here's the hip joint. Here's the head of the femur. And then that ligament would run just this little distance right here. And you'll notice that that acetabulum is much, much deeper than the glenoid fossa on your scapula was, because that hip bone really makes this deep pocket, and it is very difficult to dislocate a hip because that head of that femur goes in so far to that acetabulum. Whereas dislocating a shoulder, it's not all that difficult. It's kind of a common thing, actually. But to dislocate a hip is pretty rare, because that socket is really, really deep. So there's one way to articulate with the hips. And then you have a very different articulation here that you're going to see in our knee here in a little bit. And this is, a medial condyle, lateral condyle of your femur. And then this is the medial condyle and the lateral condyle of your tibia. And then they're going to meet here in your knee. And so it's a different setup. There's still ligaments just running everywhere that you hear about football guys injuring. MCLs and ACLs and that kind of stuff is how we tie it together, as opposed to the big socket with just one little ligament. So two different ways to get the same job done. Patella, if you're asked the anatomical name for a kneecap, it's called a patella, and it is our largest sesamoid bone, or the largest bone that is completely embedded in tendon, really, in cartilage. So let's stop there. We'll come back next time and do a tibia and a fibula. You've got a lot of terms to learn, and you take a minute and practice some of those worksheets that we have over your femur, because there are a couple for them. So thanks for your time.